This is the Turn Your Life Around podcast, and I'm the 180 lady. I've been helping people turn their lives around since 2007 as the founder and CEO of a large mental health company. The purpose of this podcast is to have meaningful conversations with old friends and new friends, everyday people just like you and me, about how they turn their lives around. We'll discuss all things mental health, fitness, finances, relationships, parenting, spirituality, you name it. My hope is that you can take something away that will encourage you today. I'm your host, Sarah Coates. Are you ready to turn your life around? Hi, Jordan.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
This is our friend Jordan McVay. He is a customer success manager at Lightning Step, which is an all-in-one platform for behavioral health facilities and providers, which is kind of how we got connected.
It is.
Since we're both in the behavioral health space. I know you've been working there for about a year. And prior to joining Lightning Step, you spent 5 years working in facilities and programs for other behavioral health facilities and institutions, substance use treatment centers. And so welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know you have
happy to be here.
a lot to share. You have a lot of experience, a great story, a great turning life around story.
Yeah, I think it was a great introduction. I think prior to all that, I think life was on fire.
Literally.
Yeah, it's been a journey, right? And I guess a testament to it's never too late to start. You know?
Yeah. You know, in our podcast intro, it says that we are having conversations with regular, everyday people, just like me, just like you. And that's why I appreciate that you're here today, because I think you are, regular, everyday people with a really good story about how you turned your life around. So can we just kind of start at the beginning for a minute? Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you came from, where you were raised.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Ohio, a very small southern rural town. I grew up in an alcoholic home, and so it was chaotic, and there's a dysfunction that comes with that, and I don't think not unique to anyone else that's experienced that. We moved to North Carolina when I was young. Still, I was 10 maybe, and started a life here, and that was a blessing, but I always felt different. I always felt unique, and that no one else was experiencing the things that I was experiencing at home, and that kind of led me into the path of like seeking relief through whatever it was at the time, and eventually it became alcohol and drugs, and then I was off to the races from a young age, middle school, high school.
How old were you when you first experimented?
13.
Wow.
Give or take. Yeah, it's probably 13. One of those like medicine cabinet, like it kind of accessibility type things. And it didn't take long before I started seeking it out and that kind of thing. So yeah, from an early age, I was trying to escape from. I found out later, ultimately, myself, I had this sense of just dis-ease, right? And this sense of restlessness and discomfort. And I grabbed onto anything that I needed to seek comfort.
Yeah. I in our exchanges in email prior to the podcast, I noticed that when you write dis-ease, you write it as dis-ease, kind of like discomfort, not a disease, but dis-ease. I think that's really a fascinating way to explain it. Did you come up with that, or did somebody teach you that?
I think at some point I listened to a speaker and an alcoholic, and I had heard the term a couple times, and and it was just broken down where it was, and it really struck me because I do suffer from the disease of alcoholism and addiction. I lump the drugs and the other substances into alcoholism as a disease. But if I was to describe that to someone, it is literally dis-ease. And that is the state that I am in. And without programs and support systems and an active program for me, I will try to ease that disease. And for me, it's alcohol, alcohol and other substances, anything to make me not feel the way that I feel at that given moment.
So you were in middle school, high school when I guess things started to get out of control, or just kind of take us back from there.
Yeah, I think middle school, I started experimenting and testing things out, the typical kind of getting into a little trouble with the friends. High school was ultimately not bad. I wasn't the best student in the world. But I began partying a little bit more, and it was more social, and I always wanted to feel a part of, right? So I made myself a chameleon, and I fancied myself I could be friends with anyone, which was true,
Right.
but it was to an end, right? They had something that I wanted at that time, and it began to take a turn, junior, senior year, and then I graduated by the skin of my teeth. Shout out to the teacher. There's a handful of teachers that really pushed. I don't know if they really wanted me out or they, but they were extremely helpful in me graduating, and then I moved to Wilmington, and
Wilmington's tough.
and there we went.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very familiar with Wilmington. It's a port city. I know that that's heavy drug use in Wilmington because of the port and all the access. So I bet that was difficult.
It was very difficult, and it was my first time. I had never lived outside of the home. For as bad as I always wanted to get away, and I blamed the alcoholic home for all of my troubles. Like, my parents, they had gotten sober, so it was like things were good, and they were happy and all of that. But it was my first time out of the house, and I went after it.
Yeah.
And my college career became marred by partying, and although I earned credits and was able to learn some things, I spent a bulk of it partying.
Yeah. So what happened during that time in Wilmington?
Man, I was 20, so this would have been my first stint. I think it became glaringly obvious to my parents and to others. It was the first time where it was publicly known that I probably had a problem, right? And there wasn't some big grandiose event, or anything like that. It was just like the inability to function in day-to-day world and accomplish regular tasks and handle any responsibility. And I was also failing school, right? So,
and who was paying for that?
right, yeah. So they jumped in and they were like, we think you need some help. We're gonna get you some help, and I obliged. So that was my first rehab adventure.
Was it kind of like an intervention, or did they just call you up one day and say, we want to help you? I mean, how did that all go down?
The girl I was dating at the time, had kind of conversed back and forth with my family and reached out and was like, hey, something's not okay. And I had also agreed that, yeah, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
And some of it was out of protection of whether it's ego or whatever the case may be. But they drove up and they picked me up and I agreed. So no real major intervention of like reading the letters like you
Right.
see on the
Right, on
TV,
TV,
but
yeah.
a semi intervention for sure.
And you were 20, 21?
20.
20.
Yeah.
Wow. And so you went to rehab.
Mm-hmm.
How was that experience? I think a lot of people who've never had any kind of experience in rehab or with addiction, they don't really understand what is rehab.
What is rehab? My first stint now. I have I've had 4 or 5 stints
Okay.
in rehab and just a countless number of outpatient programs and different attempts. But it's a jarring experience because but I always thought of it as I don't know what I had pictured in my mind at that. It's sometimes it's hard to go back, but it was an amazing experience. Now, my first, I got kicked out by insurance. Now, don't get me started on that rabbit hole.
Oh,
'Cause
yeah. We won't go on that soapbox.
Yeah. but yeah, it was a group of individuals that it was really comfortable. They detoxed me. They, and structure. It was the structure that I needed. If I lump them all into one, right? It's a group of folks that all need help and they're providing you some structure and
Right.
and trying to teach you some discipline, and which I lack.
That's an interesting point because a lot of people actually feel more anxiety when they don't have structure. I mean, certainly not everybody, but there are certain kind of individuals that need structure to not feel anxious. And so that is interesting that your dis-ease, which would be, I think, summarized kind of anxious state,
Sure.
right, was kind of helped by a rehab facility where people who cared about you and had structure and discipline. That's just interesting. I just thought about that.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. And I think for me, that structure and that lack of idle time does one thing for me that I think is probably top 2 most important things in my recovery today is I stop thinking about myself.
Interesting. Yeah, tell us more about that.
The more I am in my head and thinking about Jordan and what I want, what I need, what I want to accomplish, what I want from other people, all of that twisting and turning, that will inevitably put me in a place of dis-ease. Because if I think about all the things that I want and need and et cetera, there's very few that I have total control over. The less I think about me, the more serene and calm I am throughout the day.
Yeah, which is fascinating because it's kind of the antithesis of what society tells us, which is very me-centric, very, you do you, pursue your passions, do what you need to do, serve yourself, and which is kind of the opposite of what you're saying makes you comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's not so much as divorced from the fact of that I'm not chasing my goals or chasing my ambitions,
Right.
or that I'm not doing those things. It's just that in the midst of that, if I'm sitting there and thinking about Jordan, like thinking about me the entire time, I will inevitably concoct stories and write scripts and begin to believe everything that I think.
Right.
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 And that's not a,
And everything that you feel.
right.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything becomes the truth. Right. And I've found that inventory processes and kind of self-reflection that the less I think about me, the better off I am.
Right.
It's been my
Right.
experience.
So how do you put that into practical application these days? I know you're married. Do you have pets? You have coworkers. Like, what do you do to put the focus on others instead of yourself?
Ooh, now this is a challenging question to answer because I am my favorite thing to think about. But I think today I am happily married. I've been married since 2018, and I have two pit bulls that we rescued that are everything. As we no kids or anything like that,
Yeah.
so they are our kids
Yeah.
at this point.
Your dog parents. I get
Yeah,
it.
absolutely, absolutely. And so for me I really have to be intentional about how I'm showing up, right? And my motives and showing up in a way to be useful to others, whether that be my wife or friends or coworkers. Am I showing up to be of usefulness to others, or am I showing up to try to get something?
Oh, wow.
Because I think for me, it's taken a lot of humbling experiences to learn that in order to receive, I had to really earnestly learn how to give
Mm.
and learn how to show up with no ulterior motive, no just no urge to want something from you specifically, whether
Right.
it be money or whatever the case may be, and show up with an honest view of I'm going to be useful to this individual, and that's it. And that showing up that way helps me not think about me.
So it's been about a decade since your first rehab stint. So take us through that decade. What else happened? So you did the rehab stint. Obviously, you relapsed because you've talked about others rehab stints.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was shortly there. So my first rehab stint was I think about 2 weeks, 15 days um before you're faced with a decision that you pay full price, right? Or leave, and if you relapse then we'll pay for it in full. But yeah, I had a short stint. I think I stayed sober for I think I put together about 30 days or so. Before I was off to the races again. And that first one was to get people off my back.
Yeah.
Like, and that's, it's not foreign. It's not unheard of, right?
Right.
It's like, I'll do this if y'all just shut up.
Right.
Like, so I did that. And, yeah, it just continued with every relapse, it got darker and darker. And I think my 22, 23, like it was my everything. Like I drank every day. Like it was an everyday thing at that point. And yeah, and then it became the cycle of it getting really bad, me getting cleaned up, detox, and maybe I just detox at the hospital and get back on my feet and try to manage it. And then it was that cycle. And at that point I was using drugs and alcohol combined. And the drugs that I was using, I literally lost my mind. I went completely insane.
And so you don't mean that facetiously either.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Can you describe that? What does that mean?
I went into psychosis. So I went into drug-induced psychosis, and it was in the beginning. It was short-lived. Like it would happen in small doses, right? Where I would hear, I would have audible hallucinations, and eventually it got to where I had full-on visual and audible hallucinations, and there were times where it would last. Oh man, I think at its peak, it probably lasted about a month, where I was just
Wow.
like hearing things that weren't there, and it wasn't. The scariest part for me was it wasn't uh, demons, or it
Yeah.
wasn't the fantasy creatures or whatever. It was people in my life today that I loved and trusted and cared about, and it was telling me all the things that I was telling myself, but from an external source. So yeah, I listening to the laptops. I was full on psychotic, and it took intervention from my girlfriend at the time, and my parents that
Yeah.
stepped in, and they were like, "Oh, okay,
Yeah. This is serious now.
yeah."
We're done playing around.
Yeah, so I went to the hospital, and then that led to another stint in rehab.
Wow. And so, did you sober up then? Was that the final relapse phase? I mean, what happened after that?
Man, they didn't think I was gonna come out of it. I eventually did, thank God. And I put together a decent stint of sobriety after that. I think maybe close to a year. And then I felt like I had enough knowledge and enough information about myself and enough
Yeah.
intellectual power to manage it and adjust it. I was just not going to do this thing, right? So that's what I did. I did that up until my late 20s, and then the drinking became heavier and heavier and heavier, and I was a around the clock drinker. I was going to work. I was selling cars at the time, and eventually they approached me, and they were like, "Okay, like uh, we can't do this. Like
Right.
we can smell you, you
Oh,
know?"
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then all the physical ailments and internal bleeding and just all the whole list of things I was experiencing, and I detoxed and went back to treatment again
Wow.
at 27, 28, and that was when I finally kind of put close to 2 years together, and I had one. And then I leaned into career. Right, that was my comfort. I'm gonna
Right.
catch up all this time that I've missed. All these folks that have gotten married and done all these things. I'm gonna catch up. So, uh, so yeah, I got married at 6 months sober in 2018. She had been with me through all of it.
Yeah.
And so I got married then and jumped into the healthcare field and behavioral health, and discovered I was really good at it, and it became my everything. And then I had a brief relapse, and yeah, it was just, and then I here I am today. So
Yeah.
4 5 years later.
The brief relapse didn't take you out. It sounds like it was.
No, it was very, very short lived. I was in a very, very dark place, and it's interesting because when we first met, we talked a lot about, well, what happens when she gets sober,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
what do you do?
Exactly.
And that's exactly what I did. I jumped into my career. I was like, I'm gonna make money. I'm gonna do all these things,
Mm-hmm.
and I started to, but as soon as that fractured just a little bit, or didn't, things weren't going the way that I had scripted them out of my head to go. I began that disease is building and building and building, and yeah, and then I manipulated who I needed to manipulate, and I eventually got a full prescription, and I was in such a dark place, and um, long story short, a wife found it, discovered that that's what I was doing, and I got a full prescription on April 17th, and I overdosed on April 19th.
Wow.
After she found it, and my sobriety date is April 20th. So, and I've been sober ever since.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
She's a trooper.
Yeah,
She needs to be on the podcast.
Yeah, I would talk to her. She's probably a lot more interesting than I am at this point, but I don't know. She saw something in me that it took me 10 years to
Right.
really see in myself, and stuck through it.
Yep.
And yeah, she still puts up with me today.
So you shifted from working in the behavioral health care facilities to now working the software platform. How did you
Yeah.
make that transition?
Oh, I tripped and an opportunity presented itself. I think I was in between facilities, and was helping out a close friend of mine, and who was starting an outpatient, and it kind of came to be that Lightning Step had they were looking for someone, so I reached out, and interviewed, and they had me join the team, and software is never something that I had done previously, and I just absolutely loved bridging the gap between the two. But yeah, it was kind of happenstance, right? It was just, I don't know. It's a testament to I was showing up in an effort to be useful to someone else, and I ended up reaping benefits from that, like that I didn't know were were there, I guess.
And is that something then that you can carry forward, showing up for someone else, being useful for other people, and then you reaping the benefit? How are you carrying that forward?
I work with a lot of young guys trying to get sober, but I think I try to carry that forward in all of my interactions and in everything that I do. Divorced of personal gain, right? Like I think we all, like, I know for me, we all want the things. I want the things. I want the house, the career, the et cetera, right? And anytime where that's been my hyper focus, I've lost things. And the first thing that I lose is myself. And then it's all downhill from there, right?
Yeah.
So I try to carry that through and just be kind and seek to identify rather than differentiate, and it puts me in a place to be useful to other people. And when I do that wholeheartedly, I tend to benefit in some way, shape, or form at some point.
Yeah. And it sounds like it helps keep you sober.
Yeah, first and foremost, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a good formula for people who are struggling. with really any form of anything, if you put others first, it keeps your focus off yourself and you're able to be useful and helpful and feel good about your purpose walking around the planet every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had such a broken self-esteem, right? Like I really hated myself for a long time. And somebody, I was explaining to them how bad my self-esteem was, and it was really a woe is me moment, right? I was riddled with self-pity, and I'm like, well, when's the last time you did an esteemable thing, right? And I was like, oh, so to build my self-esteem, I need to do esteemable things. Well, in order to do that, I had to think less of myself and go out there and just be a useful and productive member of my community. And as I did that, I happened to notice that I felt better and I was kind of more confident, and it was kind of a byproduct of, and it was an easy lift. So
yeah. I think if anybody can take away anything from our conversation today, that could be the most valuable thing, as we're just navigating this very self-centered society that we live in.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, well, I mean, we all have wants. I mean, I'm ambitious, and don't get me wrong, I'm certainly not perfect at this, right? But I think that's the simplest and it's been the easiest and the most kind of the most important thing, I think, was just thinking more of others and less of myself.
Yeah, that's awesome. Are you helping others, these people, you said, I think, young men that you kind of mentor, are you teaching them the same concept?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't like it. I don't, and sometimes I don't either. But yeah, I mean, um, it's admitting that you need help and that you're willing to go to any lengths to do it. And then following some directions, and the directions were laid out to me, and I just share with them what my experience has been, and what worked for me, um and sometimes they get better, and sometimes it requires more pain.
Yeah.
So
I was thinking about your multiple stints in rehab and how that is such a common story for so many people who are struggling with addiction. Get clean, relapse, get clean, relapse. From your experience, what do you think would prevent people from the multiple relapses? Or is there a way to prevent that? Do they just have to go through that?
I don't know that I don't think there's a magic bullet, right? I wish there was. God, I wish there was. To say, here, if you just do this,
Yeah.
you won't relapse again. And I think it's something you just have to go through. And everyone's journey is different, right? Like I work with guys that they have, their bottom looked like cars in the driveway, job, pension, you name it, right? But they were miserable.
Yeah.
And then I look at my personal experience and others, and I had to be like at the tipping point. Like, am I gonna take my own life, or am I gonna drink and have it happen slowly, or am I gonna accept some help and follow some directions? And so I think it's just whatever that level of discomfort and misery and pain is that says, I don't want to.
Yeah.
I'm done.
It's that individual final choice of I'm done.
Yeah, I think in every bottom, think for me, like there's always a bottom lower than the one that I've experienced.
Wow. Wow.
Right? There's always another one.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it could be the final one, right? But thank God that hasn't been my experience.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's always another bottom if I keep digging.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
What would you say to your 10-year-old self, the one that moved from Ohio to North Carolina, that had the low self-esteem and felt lost? Would you give any advice to him?
Oh man. Don't be a sports fan.
What?
No, oh man, the advice that I would give to 10-year-old me in Ohio, it's going to be okay. You know,
Yeah.
Everything's going to be okay. Yeah, I think that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you did. You ultimately turned your life around.
Yeah, where things are good today.
Yeah, you're
Things
married, you
yeah.
have a successful career, 2 great dogs. Who knows what else is on the horizon?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you really did. You turned your life around, and that's probably what you could say to 10-year-old self is you will turn your life around.
Yeah, it does get better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a journey. I think if someone would have told me the last time that I walked into rehab, if they would have looked at me and said, "Jordan, write down exactly what your life in recovery is going to be. Write down the perfect scenario." If I would have done that, I literally would have sold myself short.
Mm.
It may sound cliche, but it's so true. I would have sold myself short to be a homeowner, to be a husband, and to be able to rescue these pit bulls, and to be able to contribute in this in the behavioral health industry,
Right.
and be a useful member of society.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been quite the turnaround, quite the journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story with our audience. I know that somebody listening can hear that main point, which is sticking out to me, is get your eyes off yourself. Put your focus on others. See how you can be useful and help others, and you might just turn your life around.
You might.
Yep.
You might. I think it's certainly a good start.
Yeah.
I just try not to take myself so serious.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's probably good advice for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks
Yeah.
again. Thanks for your time today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yep. And thanks for listening.